So there are 41 gathas. There are 41 gathas in the list of gathas, Paramatta gathas. And let us go to the last one, page 39. Living beings is the name of a continuous stream. There is a stream, there is a continuum. When you talk of living beings, looking deeply, you don't see any permanent self inside of living beings. You should train yourself to see living beings as streams. There is a that is a continuum. Living beings is the name of a continuous stream. And all the phenomena as object of perception are only signs. Therefore, there is no real change of birth into death and death into birth, and no one who realizes nirvana. This is also about removing the notion of self. We talk that salvation, emancipation, liberation, in terms of self. And the question we ask is that who is caught in the course of transmigration? Who is going through birth and death? If you speak of reincarnation, if you speak of transmigration, if you speak of rebirth, you must suppose that it is a self in order to go through birth and death. But the fact is only there is a stream, there is a combination of birth and death. But we don't need an agent, a subject, a self in order to go through. And there is a possibility of getting out of birth and death. There is a possibility of being liberated. There is a possibility of touching nirvana. But there is no self in order to enter nirvana. So, birth and death is possible without a self. And nirvana is possible also without a self. And that is why removing the notion of self is very crucial in this. Because self, when you are caught in the notion of self, you are caught at the same time in the notion of what is not self. Because the self must be the opposite of what is not self. When you take something, you single it out and you call it self, and the rest will be the opposite of self. So you are still caught in the double grasping, self and non-self. So the first notion you have to remove is the notion of self. And all Buddhist teaching is centered on this, removing the notion of self. And that does not mean that that life is not there, and the streams of living are not there. The second notion of that we have to remove is the notion of man. We had some discussion with Professor Thung the other day on man and non-man elements. And he told us that only human beings can produce that kind of thought, of mind. And we try to remind him that man is made of non-man elements. Man has human ancestors, but man also has animal ancestors, vegetable ancestors, and mineral ancestors. And that is not something belonging to the past. We continue to be animals, vegetables, and minerals at this very moment. And every time you produce a thought, even the best of thoughts, well, all elements are coming together and have produced that thought. So there should not be a discrimination between man and non-man elements, because man is made only of non-man elements, and that way we are free. And the practice of deep ecology should not be possible without that insight of interbeing between man and non-man elements. In order to protect man, in order to help man survive, we have to do everything in order to protect non-man elements, namely animals, plants, and minerals. And the third notion that we have to remove is the notion of living beings. Living being here, it means those who are not Buddhas, Bodhisattvas. There is a complex, there may be a complex between when we stand in front of the Buddha. We say the Buddha is different from a living being, but we are taught that Buddha is also a living being. A Buddha is made only of non-Buddha elements. Looking deeply into the person of the Buddha, we see afflictions, suffering that have been transformed into joy and happiness and compassion. And if we have not seen all these non-Buddha elements in him, we have not seen him yet. It's like looking into a lotus flower. We have to see things like water and the mud. If you have not seen all these non-lotus elements in the lotus, you have not really seen the lotus. So when you see that, the obstacle between you and the Buddha will be removed, and then there will be deep communication between you and the Buddha. And that is what we call sinh Phật bất nhị. San means living beings, and Phật is Buddha. Living beings and Buddha are not two different things. A non-dualistic view of Buddha and living beings. We have the complex that we are mortals, and Buddhas are immortal. Complex that Jesus Christ is a God, immortal, that we are a man, we are mortals. And if we have that kind of complex of view, it's very difficult to have real communion, communication with Jesus Christ. So the insight of interbeing concerning living being is very crucial. And the last notion that we have to remove is the notion of lifespan. The other day we already consider this. This is a line representing time, and we believe that we are born at one point of time, and we will die at another point of time, point D. And we believe that we exist only beginning at point B. And when we arrive at the point D, we stop existing, we die. So the segment BD is our lifespan. And according to the teaching of Buddha, that is not right view, that is not absolute truth. That is not ultimate truth. In the conventional realm of truth, you might talk of birth and death. You might talk of lifespan. But if you touch the reality deeper, you will find out that it is not correct to do like that. You believe that the segment from B to D represent being, your existence, and the segment before B represent non-being. From the realm of non-being, you have passed into the realm of being. There is a self beginning here and will vanish here. And you do not exist here. It's your non-being. That's our way of thinking. But when we come to reality in itself, when we practice looking deeply, we see that everything is free from birth and death. There is no beginning. We have used the example of a cloud. A cloud has no beginning. When she manifests herself in the form of a cloud, that is only a continuation. Before that, she did not belong to the realm of non-being. She was already something else. She was the water in the ocean, the heat generated from the sun and so on. So you cannot qualify the cloud as non-being before she appeared as a cloud. The nature of the cloud is nature of no birth. A cloud has never been born. And it is impossible for a cloud to die also, because in our way of thinking, conventional truth, to die means from something you become nothing. From someone you become no one. But it is evident that a cloud cannot die. A cloud cannot pass from being into non-being. A cloud can only change the form and transform. So the cloud can become rain or snow or ice, but not nothing. So looking like that, we can remove the notion of birth and death. Not only the nature of the cloud is no birth and no death, but the notion of but the nature of everything is like that. Our true nature is also the nature of no birth and no death. And if we experience that, we touch nirvana, we touch the ultimate. And what is wonderful is that when you are able to remove the notion of birth and death, you can remove also the notion of being and non-being. It's a very logical, because our definition of birth and death is based on the notion of being and non-being. To be born means from the realm of non-being, you pass into the realm of being. And to die means from the realm of being, you pass into the realm of non-being. So the notion of birth and death go together with the notion of being and non-being. And if we can remove both pairs of opposite, we are free. And many questions can be resolved just because we are able to remove the notion of birth and death. And we do not think anymore that our life is only 100 years or less. It is possible for us to die. To describe us as being is wrong, and to describe us as non-being is equally wrong. And these are only notions that cannot be applied to the ultimate reality. And to me, today, it's wonderful that science has discovered no birth and no death. Because according to the law of conservation of energy and matter, nothing is born and nothing dies. Everything we observe in us and around us can be described as matter or energy. And our mind is energy also, very powerful energy. Matter and mind are all energies. And according to the teaching of the Buddha, there is no birth and there is no death. And that has been confirmed by scientists. Rien ne se crée, rien ne se perd. Nothing is born, nothing can die. Suppose you do a chemical reaction, you prepare a few substances, and you put them together. And during the chemical reaction taking place, you see the disappearance of some substance. And you may say that substance is no longer there. But looking deeply, scientists will say that the mass of these elements, when they enter the reaction, and after the reaction, they remain the same. Nothing is added, nothing is lost. It's exactly like in the Heart Sutra, it's no increasing, it's no decreasing, nothing is lost. So the first law of thermodynamics is that you cannot create new, you cannot create energy. You can only transfer energy. You cannot create matter, because the nature of matter, energy, is nature of no birth and no death. So the point where Buddhism and science can begin is the insight of no birth and no death. Because that is perfect agreement between the two traditions. The first law of thermodynamics, there is no birth and is no death. The law of conservation of matter and energy. And it's a very solid ground to begin with. And if scientists agree that birth and death are only notions that cannot be applied to reality. And then they will stop looking for a beginning of the cosmos. It's a waste of time. And if they stand on that firm ground of the insight of no birth and no death, they will have to accept also that being and non-being are just another pair of notions. Because once you accept the absence of birth and death, you find out equally that the notion of being and non-being cannot be applied to reality. And we know that philosophers used to ask the question, why all these things come from? How from nothing something occurs? Why is there something rather than nothing? All these questions, not only philosophers ask, but also scientists are asking. Why there is something rather than nothing? Why all of that come from? What is the origin of cosmos? Is there any creator? Or the cosmos can generate its own birth? Stephen Hawking, in his book, The Grand Design, he said, because there is a law like gravity, the world can begin to create itself out of nothing. Because there is a law like gravity, the cosmos can generate its own birth out of nothing. So it's still caught in all these notions of being and non-being and birth and death. Let us begin with a sutra. The Discourse on the Middle Way, page 17. I heard these words of the Buddha one time when the Lord was staying in the guest house in a forest of the district of Nala. At that time, the Venerable Katyayana came to visit him and asked, the Tathagata has spoken often of right view. How would the Tathagata describe right view? We know that right view is one of the 8 elements of the Noble Eightfold Path, the path of practice. And the Buddha told the venerable monk, people in the world tend to believe in one of the 2 views, the view of being or the view of non-being. That is because they are bound to wrong perceptions. It is wrong perception that leads to the concepts of being and non-being. Kakayana, most people are bound to the internal formations and discrimination and preference, grasping and attachment. Those who are not bound to the internal knots of grasping and attachment no longer imagine and cling to the idea of a self. They understand, for example, that suffering comes into being when conditions are favorable, that it fades away when conditions are no longer favorable. They no longer have any doubt. The understanding has not come to them through others. It is their own insight. This insight is called right view. And this is the way the Tathagata would describe right view. We may need time to explain this paragraph, but what we need to remember now is the Buddha described right view in terms of the freedom concerning the notion of being and non-being. And right thinking should reflect that kind of insight, right action also. So when we ask the question whether the world out there is there or not, it is not there. We have to remember, because we will lose a lot of time, maybe our whole life, discussing on that. Because to be and not to be, there are two notions. And the notion of being and non-being cannot be ascribed to reality. Reality is free from notion of being and non-being. There is a scholar spending many years writing a book on nirvana, and many focusing around the notion whether nirvana exists or does not exist. But nirvana is the ultimate reality. And to say that nirvana exists is wrong. To say that nirvana doesn't exist is equally wrong. Nirvana transcends both notion of being and non-being. And not only nirvana, a cloud also, a flame also. So in Buddhism, we prefer the expression manifestation. Cho thấy cái tuổi. The other day we already spoke about a flame. And do you remember they asked the question, the flame has not manifested for us yet. We need a sign in order to recognize the flame. And when the flame manifests, we say, it is there, it exists. It belongs to the realm of existence, of being. But now it has not manifested. And do we really believe that the flame now belongs to the realm of non-being? Is it possible for something belonging to the realm of non-being come into the realm of being? The fact is that we have to train ourselves. Before the flame manifests herself, we should see the flame free from the notion of being and non-being. To say that now, in this very moment, the flame is not there is wrong. And to say that the flame is there is equally wrong. We know that looking deeply, we see that when conditions come together sufficiently, and then the flame can manifest. It does not come from the realm of non-being. Manifestation is different from birth. You are a manifestation, you are not a creation. You have not come from nothing. Nothing can come from nothing, then nothing can go and become nothing. So the notion of being and non-being should be removed in order for us to see deeply the true nature of reality. So before the manifestation of the flame, we should not describe the flame of being or non-being. And even after the manifestation of the flame, we have a perception of the flame. We should not qualify it as being either. And of course, it is free also from the notion of non-being. So this is very important. Such a sutra, only one line can already be very helpful. Right understanding, right view is free from the notion of being and non-being. In the conventional, in the realm of conventional truth, we speak of birth and death, being there or not being there, and we are used to it. And that is why it's difficult for us to remove these notions in order to get in touch with the ultimate. And the ultimate is not something far away. The ultimate should be right there. It's visible if we have that kind of wisdom, called the wisdom of non-discrimination, free of all these views. Now we have only the translation in English of some of the sutras. And we have here the origin in Sanskrit, in Chinese. I think we should help translate some of these sutras into French or other languages so that our friends who do not read English can have something to use during this retreat. And we have on page 40, 41, the list of mental formations that can be very helpful. In our practice, every time a mental formation emerges, manifests in the upper level of our mind, we should be able to recognize it and stay with it if needed. Mental formations should be considered also as energies. And with the practice of mindfulness, concentration and insight, we can transfer energy, we can transform energy. We can transform a negative energy into a positive one. But in order to do so, you have to be able to recognize the energy because mental formations they are also of an organic nature, like love and hate, despair and hope. They are energies that can be transformed. If you do not know how to handle the energy of love, it will become something else, like hate. And that will bring despair and suffering. But if we know how to make good use of the energy of mindfulness and insight, we'll be able to transform the energy of anger and hate into the energy of love again. So love and hate are also organic. All mental formations are organic. And that is why transformation and healing is possible. We don't need to create new energy, because we know that according to the law, you can only transfer and transform energy, and you cannot create new energy. And that is why we do exactly like a gardener, an organic gardener. There are garbage produced by the garden. Flowers, vegetables can be rotten and they become garbage. And as an organic gardener, we preserve all that and try to make them into compost in order to nourish flowers and vegetables. So the principle of energy transfer is also true in this practice. And suffering and happiness are also of an organic nature. It is with the suffering that we can create happiness. And we have learned that understand suffering bring about compassion, love, and forgiveness, which is the elements of true happiness. And the Buddha is aware that suffering and happiness, they interact. It's like left and right, they are always together. The difference between a practitioner and a non-practitioner is that on both sides they have suffering and happiness. But the practitioner knows how to make good use of that suffering in order to create happiness. And the non-practitioner overwhelms himself to be overwhelmed by suffering and does not know how to transform it into happiness again. And once we have been able to transform suffering into happiness, we have to continue our practice in order to keep happiness longer. And in the case happiness degenerates into something else, we have our practice in order to recreate happiness. That is why the Buddha, after enlightenment, continue to practice. You might have thought that when you have become a Buddha, why do you have to continue your practice? Because the purpose of practice is to have peace, to have joy, to have compassion. And these are energies. And you have to keep practicing in order to produce more, to make use of non-happiness elements in order to create happiness. And that is why to recognize mental formations as they are is the first step. And we should not be afraid of anger, of fear, of despair. We say, good morning, my anger. I will take care of you and I will make good use of you.